All right. Well, I want to welcome you back to my Tuesday lunch Greek reading group. It's Tuesday lunch this semester. I'll be on sabbatical in the spring. I don't know if I'll keep doing this, but we'll see. I'll miss it if I don't. But yeah, so we're going to pick up in Romans 5:12, and we did reach a breaking point, a point in the text where there is a discourse break. English Bibles, well, even Greek, I guess the Greek Bible this is the UBS text, puts a break there and adds a heading. I don't know how many English translations will put a heading right there. Yeah, there's the Net Bible does. So some Bibles will put breaks there in verse 12. So there is a bit of a seam taking place right here. We'll see that the seam is the kind of is based on the dia tutto, and then there's also a switch from like plural. We're going to see like first person plural verbs and God and us boasting in God and being justified. And then in 12, we're going to see a shift to talk about sin and death, and then to kind of hunker down into that. And then so there is a topical switch as well as this prepositional phrase which functions like a conjunction. So tutto, dia tutto. In my marking method, I put boxes around connectors, but then parentheses I put around prepositional phrases. But sometimes you'll be looking at something and it's it's grammatically marked one way. This is clearly a prepositional phrase, but in terms of its function, it is functioning as a connector. It is drawing an inference. Now, Stephen Levinson, in his essay, Wherefore and Therefore, what is the difference, or something like that, he's got this essay where he looks at inferential connector constructions in Paul. And he looks at Dio, ara, un, Dio tutto, osta, and a few others. So he looks at this, but he treats Dio tutto and the like in Paul, and so he studies it as a connector. Now, what it's doing is bringing forward some particular element as a this is backwards referencing. So on account of this, or therefore, but I like on account of this because in terms of translation, because it helps retain the thisness of the backwards referencing. And so what is exactly the thisness? And we'd have to go back to what was just lastly said, I think, or the big idea. Probably it's the reconciliation, the kata gain, that we received this reconciliation. So therefore, on account of this, and then he moves forward. But we'd have to look at that. What is the exact reference to the this? Or is it just kind of the general sense of we're being saved, we have this reconciliation? But Paul then says, well, let's explore this more, for this, on account of this. And then he starts talking in a in a new train of thought. Yeah, in this sense, I'm not sure how why he's using the dia tutto, because he's not going to be talking about the reconciliation just yet. He's going to be talking about more the problem and the presence of sin and death. So this is, I guess I would just leave it as a kind of an open question to keep pondering. Why is he using that connector here? He is wanting to connect back to some thought or some general thought as he keeps moving forward. So there is an inference being drawn, but he is moving the text forward. Okay, so we have an os per di enos anthropou e amartia is ton cosmon is elthen ke diates amartias o thanatos, ke utos is pantas anthropous o thanatos, di elthein o pantes amarton. Okay. Sometimes I can read, I mean, that was like pretty smooth reading. Sometimes I start thinking about it too much and then it gets really messy and some of my Erasmian pops in, but that's using a KEP pronunciation. So again, an os pair. Um, os is combined with this little particle pair. Pair, if you look it up in BDAG, it's never occurs independently. It's an extensive or intensive particle, is how BDAG describes it. It's adding a little bit of oomph to the os, and the os is making a comparison for just as now the word for isn't there. I just kind of slipped that in there. So don't put that in there. Just as in fact, and that might be my way of trying to communicate the little bit of extra force that the pair is adding to O. So just as in fact, through one person, indicating means sin into the world entered, entered into the world. That's from is erkome. And there is a redundancy, is with the prepositional phrase and is as the prepositional prefix. Now, I think it's probably more common to have them together, but well, I don't know. I have to study because this is here, I think, is optional. I think you could have said this sentence without the is erkome. You could have just said elthen is ton cosmon. So when you have the repetition of this morpheme, or this preposition, you are indeed stressing that entrance point into the world. So you would have heard this as oral repetition. And I do think it's optional. Like you don't need this is as the prepositional compound on this verb. This is obviously a second aorist from erkome. So just as through one person sin entered into the world, and through the sin, death. Now there's ellipsis here. You get a null verb that can be represented by a null sign, but it's clear that what's implied is entered into. So so sin, just as sin entered into the world, and through the sin, death entered, implied. Also, these are adverbs. I'm going to circle adverbs. Also, thus, to all people, o thanatos, di elthen. To all people, death came through. Death came through. Yeah. So there's a thorough dissemination of death, di ercoma, to come thoroughly through and passing through into every person. Death came. And then you have an F ho on the basis of which, or because, this is an idiomatic because, Pontus all sinned. Because all sinned. Okay. So Paul is drawing a really a part to whole argument. He's explaining that through one person, all were infected. And so sin, there's a process of sin, death, sin and death. Sin goes together in death. And he's going to add into that law as well. Law is a part of this mix. And so through one person, all people have been infected. And so death comes to all people because all sinned. So amartano is here. This is a second aorist verb form with a little augment added to the front. All sinned, because all sinned, death came to all people. Okay, so pretty straightforward. What we're going to see, though, eventually is that Paul is going to get more and more terse, and he's going to draw out this very interesting parallelism. But right now, I think the grammar is fairly certain, but he is here drawing a comparison. One person, what happened, in fact, to one person has also happened to all people. And this raises the theological question, issue of original sin, and how is that original sin transmitted? And, there's different theories have been proposed. I'm certainly not an expert on these different theories, but Paul is, I think, reasoning on the basis of human experience and scripture that everyone dies, and that this is connected in Genesis, obviously, to death, to sinning. Everyone dies, and so this comes by way of rejecting God's commandment, disobeying, not trusting in God, and instead listening to the lie about God, and then being expelled from the garden, and then sin enters in. It's interesting that sin isn't actually mentioned by name until Cain and Abel's story. And there's already a personification of sin as like an animal crouching to dominate Cain. And I find it, really interesting just to think through that story, that God even warns him ahead of time. Like, this sin is crouching at the door. Don't let it overtake you. And so it's I find it fascinating that the Lord God comes and speaks to Cain ahead of time to warn him about this force, this beast-like thing, this predator that is ready to consume him, to desire him, um, in a way that's yeah, just very deadly, and it leads to him killing his brother. Yeah. All right. So for gar indicates support, put a box around that. Akri is what's called an improper preposition without law. Akri, it's improper because it's a quasi conjunction, like a subordinating conjunction, as well as can be used as a preposition. When these improper prepositions are are used as prepositions, they always take the genitive. So mekri would be another example. Eos would be another example. Eos, until. A lot of them seem to be time words. I don't know the percentage of that, but I can't remember where the accent is for Eos. But yeah, this is an improper preposition. Um, so without the law, akri, is that akri? Drawing a little blank there. Yeah, or until. Yeah, it's until. Until the law, so up to the point of the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not reckoned. This is olegid, olegeo, and then you have a me ontos nomu. And this is a genitive absolute with this is a form of the verb imi, to be. Um, so we might say, while law does not exist. For until the law, sin was in the world. Moreover, however, de is indicating a new development, but in this case, there's an implied context of contrast. So, but may be a good would be a good translation here. But sin is not reckoned or accounted while there is no law, with the law not given. So this is a circumstantial participle clause, me here, me ontos nomu. It's post-positioned, so it's post-nuclear verb, post-positioned, and circumstantial participle clauses located after the main verb have three main functions. They can be redundant to that main verb, which is not taking place. They can be explanatory, which this one is, or they could be transitional. And I don't think this is functioning transitionally, but Paul is going to be talking about the law more in terms of like the misstep and that kind of thing. At least it's implied. Actually, yeah, he doesn't go on to talk about it as much as I thought. I guess this is the end of his discussion of that. No, he does bring it back up in 20, verse 20. So yeah, this is not transitional. This is explaining why or in what condition sin is not being accounted for. And really then one of the this gets us thinking about what is the purpose of the law. The law is to define sin, to give it shape and contour in a sense, to help us know that there are boundaries and that what it means to pass that boundary. So the law has a very important purpose, not only to guide us in good life, but also to say you have a sin problem. There is a sin problem, and there's going to be violations, and you need help to overcome those violations. And of course, the Mosaic law, the covenant, had provisions for dealing with violations. The sacrificial system was set up and these kinds of things. So, but the law did, as Paul explains in Galatians, the law is a pedagogue, a tutor that disciplines when the child was out of place to say, hey, you're breaking that. That's a violation. And these pedagogues were slave servants that did educational tutoring of students and were often depicted in statuaries with rods because they were known for their disciplinary actions. So that's really interesting. So he develops that metaphor in Galatians, but not here. So right now, though, we are learning that the law serves an accounting function. But what do we do when there is no law? We still know that sin is in the world because we see people dying, and there's a connection between sinning and dying. Now, I find it interesting that the word sin is referred to appear with the article. So it has the article, but then here there is no article. And so I think in terms of information structure and what is indicated by the use and absence of the articles. Typically, when you introduce something new into the discourse, it comes in without an article, unless it can be assumed from the situational context or an environment that is evoked. Now, Paul has already talked about sin in chapter 3. Uh, and so he doesn't feel the need here to have to reintroduce it. There's kind of an assumed context. We're sinners. So sin is understood that it's around. So for sin to be having the article is we could explain this as anaphoric referent use or actually from your perspective, to refer back to what's already been discussed. That's called anaphoric reference. But for him to switch to no article here when the when something is established in the context, you typically keep referring to it with an article unless you want to stress that person as doing something important or here some concept. So I would say that there's some kind of stress here on sin as an entity. He's explaining something important about sin. And so I just kind of throw that out there. This is the kind of thing that I want to do more thinking about on my sabbatical, is understanding when this is on and off. Okay, in my Koine Greek grammar, I summarize these principles drawing on the work of Jenny Reed Heimerdinger and Stephen Levinson. All right, so verse 14. But now Allah is indicating a correction. And typically there's an implied oo or may, or there is an explicit oo or may, so not this, but this. And here in verse 14, what is the correction in relation to? I think it's in relation to this idea that it's that it's not accounted for when there's no law, but nevertheless, the correction is that death ruled. Death ruled. So death reigned or ruled from Adam as far as until Moses, the giver of the covenantal law, and upon those not sinning in the likeness of the transgression of Adam, who, and here I'm doing my marking as I'm kind of translating this, who is a type of the one to come. Made that a little bit too big. No, that's too small, but I'll leave it. No, I'm not happy with that either. Just right. There we go. The type of the one coming. Okay, so we got to break this apart. So there is a correction here, and it has to do with, while sin is not accounted, it nevertheless, the correction is that it indeed ruled. It ruled from Adam until Moses and ruled upon, had rule over or upon, and then you have the epitus upon the ones not sinning. So this is an aorist substantive participle, the ones not sinning from hamartano. The ones not sinning in the likeness of the transgression of Adam. Now, what does that mean? Well, in the likeness of the transgression. Here we have to see and note that we're dealing with another word for sinning. And actually, this deserves careful attention to note that Paul uses, and really New Testament authors, they use different words that would fall under the domain of sin or misstep. And each one of them construes sin and the fault and failure in a different way. Parabasis, this is parabasis, is indicating a misstep with an implied boundary. Parabasis, it's a stepping aside it. It's a bypass of the stipulation. So I got into, and it's related to paraptoma. They each have paraptoma. We're going to see this is a misstep as well, a misstep falling. It means to stumble beside. So this is a step. This is from beno, to walk or to step. Bino, beno. This is beno, proper pronunciation. So this has to do with walking. So this is related to that. This is related to a root that has to do with falling, like a stumbling. If I remember that correctly, I'm just going to stop and just look at that. The paraptoma is a violation, a wrongdoing. Go to Liddell. Yeah, I like to go to Liddell Scott Jones here. Yeah, it's a false step, paraptoma. All right, so it's important, and we could find studies that try to distinguish these different words. Actually, a really nice one would be to go to is Zodhiates. The book here is called Complete Word Study Dictionary. He will look at these words and talk about them in relation to one another. So he'll have a description here. So here he's distinguishing paraptoma. Then he's talking about parabasis. So he says this is the stronger of the two words in his view. So he lists synonyms. And anyway, so I recommend that work to you. It's certainly something to consult to get thinking about this. But really, we need to do good word studies to see the difference. Amartia is a more general category. When you get into parabasis and paraptoma, you're talking about particular faults and missteps. And so what Paul is trying to say here is that there's different types of sin and missteps. And sin in general, you could be ignorant that you're in sin, but everyone still bears the same consequence of death. But with Adam in the garden and Adam and Eve, there was specific commands that then when they violated, it was indeed a parabasis. It was a stepping beside of that and violating that. So, and this then gets us to the reason the law was given. One of the reasons is to define sin, is to delineate boundaries and best living. And then when there's violations of those known specific commands, then you're in a parabasis situation where you're intentionally going past what was known to be the right thing to do. All right, so here Paul is using Adam. He wants to get the discussion to Adam because Adam is going to be a type for the one who is coming. Now, who is the one who is coming? This is the substantive participle from mello, which means to be about to. It tends to construe some future kinds of things. So here it's a genitive masculine singular, and it's referring to, as we know, it refers to Jesus, to Christ, and he's going to start moving the discussion to there. So this is what he's doing. He's kind of moving, talking about sin leading to death, death ruling, and but law defines things. Adam had a misstep because he had a command that he violated, and now Paul's going to unpack the difference between the misstep and the grace, verse 15. So let me pause right there. We're covering, I guess we've already covered 3 verses. Do you have any questions about any of this grammar? It's all kind of making sense.
Regarding tupos, to melon toast,
Yeah.
very interesting. Thank you for
Yeah.
analyzing and explain us. It's so nice. And then specifically, I want to know what the tupo. Yeah, tupos is in English type or form.
Mhm.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Tupos. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
yeah.
think there's probably some it's a word that has a broad usage. can be used in many different contexts. But I think often in our context, it's used of a like an example. There's some imitative dimensions to it, like examples to follow, that kind of thing. You can see that literally it's just a mark or trace, copy, image. So
Oh,
it has a lot of different meanings and uses. And so we either that means that we have to look at each particular one in its context. I mean, look at the variety,
oh,
content,
oh,
text. I
oh.
mean, it's quite a
Yes.
broad. And then here, this is kind of what we're looking at is the archetype pattern or model,
Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, hold on,
an
hold on. Yeah,
example.
yeah.
Yeah. So now we're getting into like imitative types and that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
It's interesting, you know. RK means Jesus Christ RK.
The
So
ruler, rule, archetype, you mean?
yeah, yeah, archetype. So Jesus
Yeah.
Christ RK, and then he is our original image model. So
Yeah.
Jesus Christ is the type,
Hmm.
the original
Hmm.
type of our original human being, our true
Yeah.
selfhood. So he is
Yeah.
the archetype of our true being. Or is this prototype, archetype? Jesus also, Bible says, prototos,
Hmm.
protocolos
Yes,
in
in
Colossians.
Colossians.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So is
Yeah.
it what is would you distinguish prototype and archetype?
Hmm.
Or
Hmm.
same, or prototype is a better word since archetype is used in
Yeah,
Jungian
well,
psychology.
we have to get the logic straight. I mean, so by correlating with other New Testament texts, we know that everything was made through Christ. So in that regard, Jesus is the prototype. And so Adam has his makeup, his being modeled after Christ, the Son, the eternal, everlasting Son, who is the medium of creation as the Logos and as the prototype. So then Adam is made in the likeness of God, Jesus, and with the Father. But then in terms of this historic argument that Paul is making here in the text, Adam is uh is a prefigurement type of Jesus who is coming. So it's kind of for the sake of his argument, he's going to draw a comparison contrast between Adam and what Adam brought into the world and what Jesus is going to bring into the world. And so that's why he's talking about Adam as a type in relation to the really we would consider Jesus the well the son as the archetype. But but he's they're both Adam and Jesus are humans, but Jesus and the work of Jesus as the revealed Christ is going to be Paul's going to argue is undoing the work of Adam.
I see.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. How about verse 15 then? We see an Allah with an uk. And here it's this is an interesting construction. So it's verbless. This is very this is verbless. And so we have to start supplying these verbs. And so all we can do is kind of mark up the sentence, not as the transgression, thus also the gift. So what does that mean? So there's no verb that is translated literally. So, but not like the transgression, thus also is the grace, the gift of grace. So basically, he's saying the grace that comes is not comparable to the misstep. Yeah. So the Allah here, what we're encountering is kind of some interesting constructions because Allah normally, when we think of Allah, there's a prior u or uk, but in this context, that uk is not explicit. And so what's happening here is the Allah is really just correcting the wrong assumption that Adam is just a mere type, like an equal type of the one coming. He's not a mere type. There is indeed a difference. And that's what this Allah is signaling is that there's a distinction, an important correction in the implied, from the implied inference that one might draw is that, oh, he's a type and they're exactly equal. He's saying, no, however, no, let me correct this. So just as not that is the transgression, thus also is the grace. They're not comparable. They are in fact there's important distinctions. Okay, so that's what he's establishing here, and he does that by way of this terse, dense, verbless subordinate clause in relation to the main clause. So at this point, I put the brackets around what is the subordinate clause, um, and then the main clause then is offset by these two adverbial, thus also the gift, the charisma. Okay, now he's going to support that because that's a big claim. And actually it's a hard thing to argue, as we'll see in a sense, because the sin comes to everybody and death comes to everybody, whereas Christ's death and resurrection and the salvation that comes through Christ doesn't isn't received by all. So it's a difficult position that Paul is arguing in a sense because death is thorough, sin is thorough, but not everyone receives the life-giving grace that Christ offers. So we're going to see how Paul argues and works with this. Okay, so four. He starts with the four to support this. E is also a connector. It indicates a conditional sentence, the protasis, the supposition of a conditional sentence. And then we have a dative of means. And so I'm going to put that in curly braces. We have a subject, e pli, and then the verb apithanon. For if by the transgression of the one, namely Adam, many died, by how much more? And this is a dative of comparison, special use, dative of comparison with the malon, which is a comparative adverb. And there should be some highlighting here of polu, but but for some reason that was lost. This should be gray highlighted, and so should this. So I think that was something happened, and then this should also be gray highlighted. The gray highlighting meaning is indicating where there's numeric specification, and to pay attention to that is often exegetically important. And then the malon is supposed to have a purple highlight, which is to help indicate that there is a comparative dimension there, a comparative aspect. But that coloring didn't come through here. So, for if by the transgression of the one many died, by much more, and this is the main sentence. This is called the um, the apodosis, or the conclusion. And I'll put the article down here. So the main sentence is this: the grace of God and the gift in the grace of the one person, Jesus Christ, to extending to the many, abounded. Abounded, perisuo, is a verb of like to be plentifully, to be plentiful, to abound. And here we are, I'm going to cut off the augment. And so what's happening is that uh, Paul is contrasting what happened with through the transgression of the one man. So this is a date of means, by means of the one man, namely Adam. And this is a supposition, for if by the transgression of the one man, one person, many died, by
Um,
much more the grace of God and the gift of God in the grace of the one person, Jesus Christ, abounded to
15
the
more
many,
minutes.
to the many. Can someone turn off their audio? Thanks. There's an audio that's affecting this. Yeah. Okay. So we have E with the aorist indicative, followed by the main clause, which has an aorist indicative. So this is so here's the supposition in the yellow, and then the conclusion is in the blue highlight. And so when I see conditional sentences, first I get really excited. And then secondly, I try to try to understand the semantics of the construction. E with the aorist indicative followed by the main clause, which is aorist indicative, is just what's called a simple past condition. It's relating past events causally to a past event. Okay. So what Paul is doing here is stressing that the grace of God and the gift in the grace of the one person, Jesus Christ, abounded to the many. Now that's interesting that he's doing it that way. And what's interesting is saying it the way he does is he says that many died through the one, so the transgress by means of the transgression of the one person. How come he doesn't say all died? Does anyone have any ideas on that? Why did he say many died? Well, did everyone die? Aren't there some traditions that certain Old Testament figures were translated up into heaven, right? Aren't there two? Enoch walked with God and then was no more. And then was it Elijah that that seemed to not die as well? So there is this kind of these interesting traditions that at least a couple people didn't die. Or is Paul softening that to say the many so that the grace that abounds to the many, so that there's an equivalence, many and many? Yeah, it's interesting to think of that. But he is stressing the grace and the grace and gift in the grace of the one person, Jesus Christ, abounds to the many. So here he's working hard to explain how Jesus is overcoming, how God's grace and the work of Jesus Christ is overcoming the problem of sin and death. Yeah. Okay. And so verse 16 is going to be adding something. The ke is indicating the addition of material into the argument. He says it's not as through the one sinner, the one sinning is the gift, as through the one sinning is the gift. So the gift is not like that which came through the one person sinning. Now, this is a verbless sentence. Again, as I indicated earlier, that Paul's grammar is at times very terse. It's very dense and compact. And I think it's because of the complexity of the ideas. But this is good Greek style. You could definitely do this. I think it may be actually a bit more philosophical, a bit more rhetorical. I remember reading through Gorgias's Encomium of Helen. This is an old piece that goes back to the 5th century. And I remember reading it and translating it, how difficult it was conceptually because very philosophical and argumentative because there was a lot of ellipses, a lot of implied words. And to capture the sense, you had to resupply and understand the grammar. And I remember looking at some sentences and it seemed like it would take 45 minutes, but then the meaning would hit me. And so I'm wondering if there's kind of if Paul is intentionally using a style that requires more intellectual rigor because of the nature of the material. So yeah, I would posit that there's maybe a tradition that he's drawing on or a mode that Paul he clicks into because of the nature of the material. Often Paul's grammar is reflective of the content. I keep finding examples and examples of it where the grammar is reflecting the complexity or the nature of the material. And here there's I would want him to use more verbs and he's not. So we have to kind of make sense of it. What he's saying here is that the through the one sinning person, the gift is not comparable. It's not like. And so he says there's a difference. And he's going to explain what that difference is in the second part of this verse. So let's go to that. I'm going to put a, I'm going to, he's going to start working these parallelisms very intensely, and we might get a chance to see that through verse 17. I'll try to get through 17 because there is indeed a high level of parallelism in the text. So he's going to start this parallelism with a gar, which is going to indicate that he's indeed supporting that statement. For indeed, for on the one hand, the judgment. So what's happening is the men is working with the de. This is a conjunction pair that can work together. And again, this is philosophical discourse when you're linking these ideas together. I remember working through classical texts and this kind of tight arrangement of ideas through these kinds of connectors is typical of that kind of discourse. For on the one hand, judgment from one person into condemnation. Now, it's a verbless clause. So translators will often use like translate into English like led or leads. For on the one hand, the judgment of or from the one person led into condemnation, but on the other hand, de, the grace from the basis or the need of the many sinners led to justification. So you can see the parallelism, right? You got the subject, you got the ek prepositional phrase, and then you have the destination, is, or the result, the is here. So this is tightly structured, paralleled discourse, verbless, and we have to supply a verb. I think the sense is pretty clear. I think the what is a little bit confusing is the use of ek. What is the meaning of ek here? Like how does, what does it mean that the grace, the gift, the free gift from the many sinners? From can, ek can mean on the basis of. And if it's on the basis of, you're really close to like because of. So the grace given because of the many sins led to sinners led to justification. Yeah, I think that's what's going on is ek in the sense of basis or need of from the basis of that. And charisma, these ma nouns, nouns that are ending in ma are resultative. So the result of the grace. These nouns tend to construe the end product or result of the idea. Yeah, so interesting to see that. Then verse 17, for if, there we get another condition. So if, and we have a verb, aorist indicative, reigned. So if death reigned, this looks like exactly the verse that we saw above. By means of the transgression of the one. So that's a dative of means again. And then the one is obviously referring to Adam. For if by means of the misstep of the one, death reigned through the one, by how much more, dative of comparison with the comparative word, by how much more the ones receiving. Now, this is a huge sandwich, modificational sandwich. I'm gonna show you what I mean by that. This is the article that's going with this participle, making that a substantive participle. All this stuff in between is a big set of it's an object and it's genitive modifiers. So this is you can have an article with a noun, right? And you can squeeze in all the in-between stuff in between that. And this makes it really hard to translate, particularly for beginning students, because they're seeing all this gobbledygook in the middle and they're not recognizing what it's going with. This is actually the direct object of the participle. And then you have these modifiers, genitive modifiers that go back to that. And so you have a piling up of genitive modifiers that go back to the direct object of lambanontes. Now, lambanontes is a present active participle masculine nominative plural. This is the subject, so single underlined. They will rule, future tense. They will rule. There's the future indicator through the one person, namely through Jesus, namely the Christ. So let me translate that. By how much more will rule the ones receiving the abundance of grace and of the gift of justice, of righteousness in life. They will reign in life through, by means of, that's dia, meaning indicating means, by means of the one person. And then here we get appositional enrichment, namely Jesus Christ. That's what these equal signs are indicating is apposition. Wow. So this is what kind of condition is this? It's a mixed one. You got E with the aorist indicative. That's a simple past protasis or a supposition. But then it's followed by a future indicative, which then makes it a future, probably more vivid condition. It's a mixed, it starts out simple past, and then it concludes with a future time frame. Yeah. So this is Paul's working the consequences out of the different men, the different persons. You got the one person, Adam, who let death came in, who let death come in and rule because of his transgression, whereas the ones receiving the grace and gift of righteousness will rule through the one person, namely Jesus, the Messiah. And this is, wow, this is such a powerful verse because a set of verses because what it means is that Jesus reestablishes the proper ruling function of human beings. We were meant to rule and to be stewards and take care of the earth, right? The image, humans being made in the image of God means that word image indicated the represented the kingly image of God. So as human beings, we have this kingly dignity, and we abdicated that and gave it up. But in Jesus, who is our true king, our true human representative, the ideal king, the true king, we will rule once again in the future. There will be a ruling and a restoration of our rightful place and capacity to rule. And I need to stop there because I could go off on that. This is why Jesus came proclaiming the kingdom of God is present. Repent and believe the good news. The kingdom of God has come. He represented that kingdom of God wherever Jesus was walking on earth. The kingdom of God was fully present and operative. And that's our destiny through the grace and gift of righteousness. All right, well, we'll have to end there. Thanks for joining, and look forward to having you watch, listen next time. Send me any questions, and I'll try to address them. You can email me or talk to me. Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you next time. Take care.